How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become subject to forced labor. She weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude. She now lives among the nations. She finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to the festivals. All her gates are desolate. Her priests groan, her young girls grieve, and her lot is bitter.
Hi, I'm Jacob.
Hi, I'm Nina.
Hi, I'm Mike.
And this is the Fig Tree Podcast. So today we are talking about Lamentations. It's a really fascinating book. But before we get to that, why don't we check in? How are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Enjoying the weather.
Isn't the weather great?
The weather is great.
Yeah. It's about 10 degrees better, though, in Oceanside.
We're in an inland valley, everybody.
And I live in Oceanside. So.
And Oceanside is beside the ocean, hence the name.
Yes, correct. Yeah, that's right. How are you, Mother Nina?
I'm doing great. I had a grandbaby born last month, and he was in the NICU for a few weeks, but now he's home, and everything's okay. And it's really, really wonderful to get pictures and videos of him. He's so smiling. Good. Yeah.
He's really cute. He's kind of a chunk.
Well, yeah, they all are.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What a cutie.
We have some very tall genes in my family.
I'm pretty sure he was born taller than me.
That's funny. Well, I am doing pretty good. Just came off the heels of a vacation to Florida with my family, which was really fun and refreshing. And yeah, so glad we were able to do that. So why don't we talk about Lamentations?
So, Mike, I have a question for you. What happened in 586 BCE, before Common Era?
The fall of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was sieged by the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar. The city was completely destroyed, including the first temple. The Ark of the Covenant disappeared. The ruling class, including Judah's king Zedekiah, was taken into exile in Babylon, and the others were left to suffer with nothing. You can read the play-by-play in 2 Kings, chapters 24 and 25.
That's right. They had hundreds of years of divine providence shining upon them, and then the unthinkable happens. It's all decimated. The Book of Lamentations is a work of poetry created in response to this historical disaster. It sets us in the aftermath of the destruction of Jerusalem, and it gives us the perspective of the Judeans left in the land, which was terrible. It's truly a ground zero account set into poetry.
Yeah, it's one thing to read about the facts of a destructive event in the past, but it's a whole other thing to hear from the victims themselves. And this book, it gives the victims of 586 BCE a voice, and as readers, we're transported there, and it's really pretty graphic.
In Hebrew, the book title is Ikah, which means how, as in, how could this happen? We can think of Ikah as a one-word prayer. How, God, how? I wonder, in either of your lives, have you had a how moment like this? Mike?
So I've had many of them. So I had a friend of mine, a really close friend of mine, that was dying of cancer. And, I would say how, but I would also say why. Why skip? Why now?
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so I prayed and meditated, and I went to Skip, and I said, do you ever ask how or why? And he goes, yeah. I screamed at God one day, and I said, why me? Why me? And he said, and God said, why not you?
Yeah.
So that's the one that comes right to my lips right now. So I have many hows and whys and things like that.
There's
I
a
don't
lot
wanna
of-
talk about cars and
Oh, gosh.
feeling like Job or any of those things. But
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of screaming at God in this book. So, yeah. I think for me, when I was a kid, I lost a first degree relative, and like I stayed strong, and I thought, okay, I can get through this. Life will go on. And then a year later, lost another one, and that just completely knocked me down. Like that was like the ending of my world. It felt like at the time. So that was my how moment. Like, how could this happen? This doesn't happen to people. How could this happen? It was so unexpected, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, I haven't had a big thing happen to me, but I've been alongside a number of people who have, and so my friend Tyler lost his dad when we were kids, and then my wife lost her dad when she was in high school, and we were dating at the time, and then entering into pastoral ministry, you hear just story after story after story of people who just have these horrible things happening, and it's I mean, you think, why is this happening, especially to this person,
And could it be any worse?
Right. Yeah. And I remember one time I was trying to help a woman who was homeless, and I was trying to help her. She had gotten approval for Section 8 housing, and she just needed to actually apply for the apartment. And I remember all she had was a phone. And so I'm sitting there with her, trying over the course of a few weeks, trying to apply for these apartments. And it was such a frustrating, awful, horrible process. And I thought, man, like, why would this person have to go through this? And like, everything just feels hopeless from their perspective. And it's just, it is really eye-opening, I think, to have that experience.
Well, our country has had a how moment,
Yeah.
right? In the last 25 years, where we all collectively shared that how moment.
Yeah, at 9/11.
Exactly. I mean, that was so unthinkable. What happened that day with the towers falling?
Yeah. And I think what's really important about this book is that it gives us permission to have those moments. Sometimes I feel like we can pretend like we have to always act like everything's okay, and that, we're not upset with God or anything like that. And I think a book like this tells us, actually, no, it's okay.
Well, let's look a little deeper at it. So in our Bibles, Lamentations follows the book of Jeremiah. And there's a reason for this, because Lamentations is a vindication of all of Jeremiah's prophecies. And while he didn't write Lamentations, it's strongly connected to him because he told them this would happen, and he was there to witness it too.
The book of Jeremiah, chapter 41:5, it tells of people going to worship in the ruins of the temple. 80 men arrived from Shechem and Shiloh and Samaria with their beards shaved and their clothes torn and their bodies gnashed, bringing grain offerings and incense to present at the temple of the Lord. Now, this may be the remnant from which this book took form. And so the book could be the work of one poet or up to 5, since there's 5 chapters, but really we can only conjecture about it.
But if you think about it, most people who are actively experiencing trauma aren't sitting around writing poetry, right? They're focused on survival.
Yeah, true. So this might have been written later once they could process what happened. That being said, there's no reference to people returning from exile. So it was probably completed before the temple was rebuilt and rededicated in 516 BCE, a period of about 70 years. But there's dependence on 2nd Isaiah in Lamentations, so most scholars set the authorship date around 540 BCE.
I'm glad that we're taking a deep dive on this book because we don't see much of it in our lectionary, do we?
That's right. We hear from Lamentations on Holy Saturday and maybe one other time per year in our lectionary, depending on the year. Sometimes it's a scripture choice at funerals. The Jewish people read from Lamentations on the 9th month of Av, which is typically in July or August. It's the anniversary of the destruction of Jerusalem and the first temple in 586 BCE, as well as the destruction of Herod's temple in 70 CE. It's the saddest day of their year, and many Jewish people recite Lamentations at the site of the Western Wall in Jerusalem.
Yep. So the book, it's not very long. So why don't we look at something that's amazing in its structure?
Do tell, Father Jacob.
So there are just 5 chapters, and each is a poem. And some of them follow an acrostic verse structure, where each verse starts with an aleph to tav, like A to Z, in the Hebrew alphabet. And so we see this style in some Psalms and in Proverbs, but Lamentations is really the champion of this style. Chapters 1, 2, and 4 follow the acrostic structure, and chapter 3 is a triple acrostic, which means that in the 3rd chapter, every 3 lines begin with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet in order. In the 5th chapter, that one's not an acrostic, but it does have 22 verses, which just happens to be the number of letters in the Hebrew alphabet.
Mother Nina, why do you think the full alphabet acrostic was important?
We don't know, but it's likely that it's a response to trauma. You have to realize that the loss of the temple was the loss of their connection to God. They could no longer make sacrifices to maintain their relationship with God. To make it worse, they believed that God did this. So the despair is almost unimaginable. So the use of the full alphabet structure could imply completeness, meaning it's over. It's in the past as a historical event. Or it could be referencing complete suffering. In other words, it couldn't be worse. There's no lower it could go. Being cut off from God would certainly qualify as the lowest you could go. But another view is that it could also just be an effort to simply put structure on absolute chaos and the breakdown of their society. And yet another thought is that the acrostic style could also be a mnemonic device, a way to help people memorize these poems. For all of us, reciting the poems, prayers, songs, and psalms is a way to respond to trauma, sadness, and mourning. For me, I love Psalm 121. How about you guys?
I love Psalm 121 too.
You do?
Yeah. It's one of the noonday psalms, and I just really love it. How about I read it?
Oh, please do.
So, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved, and he who watches over you will not fall asleep. Behold, he who keeps watch over Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord himself watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand, so that the sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. It is he who shall keep you safe. The Lord shall watch over your going out and your coming in from this time forth forevermore.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
What a great song.
I love Psalm 23. And I have this thing that I do that comes from my other book that I read every day. It's that when I pause, when agitated or doubtful, and I ask God for the right thought or decision. And then I say the Our Father, and then a lot of times I just do Psalm 23, or a list of all the other prayers. I love the St. Francis prayer because it takes me to a place where I am more understanding, right? That I rather be understanding than to be understood. I'd rather comfort than to be comforted. So it really helps me and puts me in that frame of mind to not be so selfish and self-centered. And why me? What about me?
I've been known to hum a childhood song that I might have learned in church. I find that very comforting.
Could you hum it for us?
No. What about you, Jacob?
I find myself often reaching for a rosary when I am in distress, and I think that's a very helpful devotion for me. I think these kinds of things are extremely helpful to us in processing and dealing with grief and pain.
Wow. Okay, well, back to the book.
It seems like the voices in the poems change.
Yep. So, yes, the voices, they change, as do the scope of the voices. For instance, in chapters 1 and 2, we hear from the nation personified as daughter Zion, the abused, unfaithful wife left with no self-worth. And so chapter 1, verse 2 says,
She weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies.
So that's whose voice you read at the beginning of this podcast.
Correct. But then in poem 3, the voice switches to a suffering, lonely man who speaks for all the people. Some say that this is the apex of the whole book, which, with its focus on the goodness of our judgmental God. It is portions of this third poem that is appointed for Holy Saturday. Unfortunately, many people don't attend Holy Saturday services. So how about we read it now? Jacob, would you mind giving us this preview?
Yeah, totally. So this is what we would read. We read, I am one who has seen affliction under the rod of God's wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Against me alone he turns his hand, again and again all day long. He has made my flesh and my skin waste away and broken my bones. He has besieged and enveloped me with bitterness and tribulation. He has made me sit in darkness like the dead of long ago. He has walled me about so that I cannot escape. He has put heavy chains on me. Though I call and cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my ways with hewn stones. He has made my paths crooked. The thought of my affliction and my homelessness is wormwood and gall. My soul continually thinks of it and is bowed down within me. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him.
Wow. There are even more voices. In poems 1, 2, and 4, there is a narrator voice making commentary on the suffering and the purpose of it. And finally, in poem 5, the community speaks as a whole and prays to God. They lament the loss of all that defined them as people of God.
They are not suffering in silence, are they?
Yeah, they are calling out to God. Chapter 5, it begins with a plea to look at them and what has happened.
Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Look and see our disgrace. Our inheritance has been turned over to strangers, our homes to aliens. We have become orphans, fatherless. Our mothers are like widows. We must pay for the water we drink. The wood we get must be bought. With a yoke on our necks, we are hard driven. We are weary, and we are given no rest.
Then there's like a middle bit, and it gets really violent and graphic. So we're going to skip over that, and we'll hear the ending, where the lament turns into repentance.
But you, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures to all generations. Why have you forgotten us completely? Why have you forsaken us these many days? Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure. Is that the end?
Yes, that's the end of the whole book. The ending really doesn't tie anything up. It's open and uncertain, just as so many of our questions are to God. And that makes the ending very honest. The book of Lamentations doesn't try to cover up the pain and suffering we experience in a broken creation, but it shows a community trying to hold it all together with the faith they had left.
We hear the prayers to God, but where is God in all of this?
Yep, that's the perennial question, and it's posed to all of us at some point or another in our lives, at those moments that we started with, right? The why moments, the how moments. Where is God amidst all the people's suffering? And the people believe that God allowed this to happen, that in some way what's happened to them is kind of a vehicle of God's judgment. And they beg God to see their suffering and have mercy upon them. And we get to hear from these different voices with different vantage points of the destruction, but God is silent.
Against this backdrop of unimaginable horror and destruction, the poet repeatedly affirms his faith in a just and faithful God. Yes, Israel is being punished for its sins of idolatry with destruction and exile, but this is not the end of the story. God will also punish these barbaric enemies, and Israel will be redeemed. Just like all devastated communities to this day, in Lamentations, Israel carries the hope of restoration. To these people and to us, God is consistent in his judgment, but also in his mercy. We just heard this in the verses appointed for Holy Saturday.
The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him.
I'm glad we repeated it because we all need to memorize these verses.
Yeah. So really at the end of the day, this book, and this is hard, right? But it doesn't give us an answer for our suffering. I think that's what we want it to give us, but it doesn't. Instead, it gives us space to confront and even protest our pain to God. And through these ancient words of lament, we hold hope for healing.
So I think it's super interesting. You know, in my lifestyle, I have a lot of friends and people that are have self-inflicted pain, but also a lot of bad stuff happens. And I've had 54 friends or acquaintances from the time I was 10 till now that have passed, super close people. And so I watch people, right? So people get all upset at God and have these God moments and yell and scream at him, but then they get in pain again. You know, they lose a spouse, they lose a child, they lose a wife, and where do they go? They go to God. 90% of the time, they're help me, you know, help me, and then He helps them, and then they forget, and they are mad at God because He took them. But He is the one who held them and pointed them in the right direction to heal or to get sober or whatever the case may be. And we forget. And I do this thing with a lot of my guys that I work with, is that I call them Lieutenant Dan moments. I think I've talked about them before, but most of us, even a lot of the agnostic and atheist people that I meet, they don't really not believe in God. What it is they have this resentment that blocks them off from God because they're mad. So why don't we have it out? Why don't we yell at Him? Why don't we put it on paper why I'm really mad and what I thought you should have done, and let God know these things. And then once we do that and we put it on paper, you start to heal, and you start to realize that you've already been forgiven, that you need to forgive God so you can access the power and keep going on.
Yeah. I remember a priest I knew, he would always say that there are no atheists in foxholes.
That's it.
I think we don't want to downplay people's struggles with, intellectually with the existence of God. But I do think it's true that in moments of great need, suddenly God can become real to us in a way that we don't usually experience because we need him. But I also think, so last Sunday, the gospel reading was Mary and Martha and Lazarus. It's when Lazarus dies and Lazarus gets raised back to life, right? And one of the things that is so striking to me about that passage is how Jesus reacts to the whole situation, despite the fact that he knows that at the very end, he's going to bring Lazarus back to life. So first of all, we find that he has purposes for why he wasn't there and why he didn't raise Lazarus. He did this for a demonstration of God's glory, all of this kind of stuff, right? He doesn't say this to Mary or Martha, but that is in the background. And I think this is true of God's working in our lives, right? God has purposes, but we don't know why. And so it can be incredibly frustrating and difficult for us. And I don't think that God is upset with us when we struggle with this. So when Martha comes up to him, Martha is very dutiful, and she says, well, I know you're going to raise him back to life and all of this. And Jesus says, yes, that's what's going to happen. Mary, on the other hand, throws herself at Jesus' feet and essentially accuses him of not loving them, kind of, because she says, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And that's all she says. And Jesus doesn't go on a long tirade of answers. He just cries with her. And then he cries more, and there's this whole kind of thing. You can see that Jesus is really disturbed by what's happened, even though he knows what he's going to do. I think this is a lesson for us, and Lamentations is a lesson for us, that we can struggle. We have permission to struggle with God. God would rather us be honest than pretend. And I think that's what we ought to do.
Well, this reminds me of a verse from Hebrews 10. Can we end with this?
Mm-hmm.
It says, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for listening to the Fig Tree Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing this podcast on social media so others can join us. We hope that you have a great day, and we'll see you next time on the Fig Tree Podcast.